Karen was the kind of driver who always seemed to be in a hurry, her impatience manifesting in reckless behavior behind the wheel. Living on the outskirts of a rural town, she often found herself navigating winding roads that occasionally led her through sprawling farmlands. While locals understood and respected the boundaries of private property, Karen saw these farm roads as mere inconveniences, obstacles standing between her and her destination. To her, they were just stretches of dirt that could easily be bypassed with a little imagination. Often, she would take shortcuts across fields, ignoring the signs that warned against trespassing. Her SUV, a gleaming symbol of her status, became a tool for her impatience. With every drive through the cornfields, she left deep tire tracks, crushing delicate crops beneath her wheels without a second thought. The sight of green plants flattened under the weight of her vehicle was nothing more than an unremarkable consequence of her need for speed. After all, to Karen, they were just plants. As she sped away, oblivious to the damage she had inflicted, she felt a rush of satisfaction, time saved and obstacles dodged. This pattern continued until one day, when a local farmer noticed the destruction unfolding in his fields. He had spent countless hours nurturing those crops, pouring his sweat and hard work into ensuring they flourished. Each tire mark on the earth was not just a blemish, it was a reminder of his labor lost. When Karen was confronted about her actions, she dismissed the farmer's concerns with a wave of her hand and an arrogant smirk. "It's just plants," she scoffed, failing to grasp the gravity of her actions. The farmer stood there in disbelief, grappling with the fact that someone could be so callous about their property and livelihood. As he watched her drive away, he felt a simmering frustration building within him, a determination to protect what was rightfully his. That day marked a turning point for both Karen and the farmer. Instead of entering into a futile argument with someone who clearly lacked empathy, he decided to take matters into his own hands. With ingenuity and resolve, he planned an unconventional form of retribution, a way to make Karen think twice before taking her shortcuts again. Little did Karen know that her next attempt at cutting through the cornfield would lead to consequences far beyond what she ever anticipated. The farmer's cleverness would soon turn the tables on Karen in ways she couldn't even imagine. Her impatience had set into motion events that would lead to an unexpected reckoning on that very stretch of land she so carelessly traversed. One sunny afternoon, Karen found herself stuck in a slow-moving line of traffic on a rural road. Frustration bubbled inside her as the minutes ticked by, the clock reminding her that time was precious. As she glanced out the window, she noticed the wide expanse of a cornfield stretching beside the road, the stalks swaying gently in the breeze. An idea struck her. With her impatience reaching a boiling point, she decided that waiting wasn't an option. Why not take a shortcut? Without a second thought, she veered off the road and onto the unmarked path that led directly into the cornfield. The crunch of gravel under her tires quickly gave way to the soft earth of the field, and Karen felt a thrill of rebellion surge through her. She pressed down on the accelerator, her SUV rumbling forward as it crashed through rows of corn. The sound of snapping stalks filled the air, drowned out by her laughter. She couldn't believe how easy it was to bypass the slow-moving traffic. As she barreled through the field, deep tire tracks carved into the rich soil behind her, each turn of the wheels signifying her blatant disregard for the farmer's hard work. Corn plants crumpled beneath her vehicle, their green leaves turning to brown in an instant as she crushed them without remorse. To Karen, these crops were merely obstacles in her path. They held no value compared to her need for speed. The vibrant life that once thrived there was reduced to an afterthought as she sped across what she perceived as empty space. But in her mindless pursuit of convenience, Karen failed to consider the consequences of her actions. She didn't stop to think about the hours spent by the farmer nurturing those crops, or about how his livelihood depended on their growth. The farmer had invested not just time and effort, but also hope into every single plant now flattened under her tires. When she finally emerged from the field on the other side, a sense of triumph washed over her. She couldn't help but smile, feeling victorious against both nature and traffic. Little did she know that this moment would mark a significant turning point, not just for herself, but for the farmer whose land she had so carelessly disrespected. As she drove away, oblivious to the destruction left in her wake, Karen felt invincible. However, this reckless act would soon set off a chain reaction that would change everything. The thrill of taking control would soon give way to unforeseen consequences that even someone as self-assured as Karen could not escape. The following morning, the farmer surveyed his cornfield, his heart sinking as he took in the destruction left by Karen's reckless shortcut. The once vibrant rows of corn were now a patchwork of broken stalks and torn leaves, a vivid reminder of her thoughtlessness. Anger coursed through him as he realized how carelessly she had disregarded his hard work and livelihood. Determined to confront her, he set out to find the person responsible for the damage. As he stood by the road, scanning the horizon for her familiar SUV, anticipation bubbled within him. He didn't have to wait long. Soon enough, Karen appeared, barreling down the road with that same hasty demeanor. When she spotted him standing beside the field, her carefree smile faded into confusion. She pulled over and rolled down her window, feigning innocence. "Hey there. What's going on?" she called out, a hint of nonchalance in her voice. The farmer stepped forward, his expression serious. "You know what's going on, Karen. You drove through my cornfield yesterday and destroyed my crops." Karen shrugged, leaning back in her seat as if the situation were trivial. "Oh, come on. It's just plants," she replied dismissively, waving her hand in a gesture that seemed to brush aside any concerns regarding the damage she had caused. "Just plants? Just plants are my livelihood." "You've damaged my entire season's work," he retorted, frustration seeping into his words. He wanted her to understand the weight of her actions, but she continued to appear unfazed. "I was just trying to save some time," she said with an infuriatingly casual tone. "It's not like I meant any harm." The farmer shook his head in disbelief. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't some open space for you to drive around in. It's private property. You can't just go crushing crops without consequences." Her dismissive attitude only intensified his anger. "Look," she said with a smirk, "I'm sure it'll grow back next season. It's not that big of a deal." He took a deep breath to calm himself, realizing that arguing with someone who refused to take responsibility was futile. "It may not seem like a big deal to you, but it is to me," he said firmly. "I put my heart and soul into this farm." Karen rolled her eyes and leaned back further in her seat, clearly uninterested in his passionate plea. "I really don't have time for this," she said as if brushing off any sense of accountability. With that final dismissal hanging in the air, she revved her engine and sped away from the confrontation. The farmer stood there watching her go, anger mixed with disbelief at how someone could be so entitled and careless. Little did Karen know that this encounter would not be the end of their saga. It was merely the beginning of a conflict that would escalate far beyond their initial exchange. After the confrontation with Karen, the farmer felt a mix of frustration and determination. He realized that arguing with someone who refused to acknowledge her wrongdoing was pointless. Instead, he decided to take a different approach, one that would not only deter her from trespassing again, but also serve as a lesson she wouldn't forget. That evening, he set to work, gathering materials from his barn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, he meticulously planned his next move. He had seen retractable spike strips used in various situations before and knew they could be an effective tool for defending his property without direct confrontation. By nightfall, he had successfully set up the spike strips along the path Karen frequently took through the cornfield. He positioned them discreetly, ensuring they would be hidden from view until it was too late for her to notice. The farmer couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as he completed his task. This would be a clever way to protect his crops while avoiding further conflict. The next day dawned bright and clear, and with it came Karen's habitual impatience. As she drove down the road, she spotted the familiar pathway leading into the cornfield. The memory of her previous shortcut lingered in her mind, a quick way to bypass traffic and reach her destination faster. With no thought of the farmer's warning or her destructive actions, she veered off once more, excitement bubbling within her. As she sped down the path, Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. But then, with a sudden jolt and a series of loud pops, Karen's SUV began to shake violently beneath her. Her tires had struck the hidden spike strips. Panic surged through her as she realized what was happening. She desperately tried to regain control of her vehicle, but it was too late. The sound of shredding rubber echoed through the field as all four tires were punctured in an instant. Pulling to a stop on the edge of the field, Karen was left in stunned disbelief. The thrill of her shortcut had quickly transformed into a nightmare as she surveyed the damage. She couldn't comprehend how it had gone so wrong or what had just happened to her vehicle. The farmer watched from a distance, hidden behind a nearby tree line, his heart pounding with a mixture of concern and vindication. He knew this moment would serve as a powerful lesson for Karen, a dose of reality that reminded her that actions have consequences. His strategy had worked flawlessly. Now all that remained was to see how she would react when faced with the fallout from her own choices. The following week, Karen found herself once again stuck in traffic, her patience wearing thin. Memories of her last shortcut through the cornfield flashed in her mind, but instead of recalling the destruction she had caused, she only remembered how quickly it had gotten her past the slow-moving vehicles. With that familiar sense of urgency creeping in, she decided to take the plunge once more. As she made the turn onto the dirt path leading into the cornfield, a sense of excitement surged within her. This will definitely save me some time, she thought, oblivious to the consequences that awaited her. The engine of her SUV hummed with power as she picked up speed, barreling toward the lush green stalks that lined her makeshift route. But today would be different. As she ventured deeper into the field, the quiet surroundings heightened her anticipation. Karen felt invincible as she crushed the first few rows of corn beneath her tires. However, just as she began to revel in her reckless disregard for the farmer's property, disaster struck. Without warning, a series of loud pops echoed through the air, sharp and jarring against the stillness of the field. Karen's heart raced as her SUV jolted violently. The steering wheel jerked in her hands, and panic washed over her as she struggled to maintain control. "What's happening?" she shouted aloud, eyes widening as she glanced down at the tires. Each one was rapidly deflating, steam escaping from shredded rubber that had been punctured by hidden spikes. In an instant, confusion turned to shock and then anger. "No, this can't be happening," she yelled, slamming on the brakes as her vehicle lurched to a stop. She took a moment to catch her breath and assess the situation. Her once proud SUV now sat awkwardly tilted on its rims, surrounded by crushed corn and deep tire tracks that marked her path of destruction. Karen flung open the door and stepped out onto the uneven ground, disbelief washing over her as she surveyed the damage. "What kind of sick joke is this?" she fumed, looking around for any sign of who might have set this trap. Her frustration morphed into outrage as it dawned on her. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately protected their property from her reckless shortcuts. As she paced around the vehicle, emotions boiled within her. Embarrassment mingled with fury. "I can't believe this. Who does this?" She kicked at a nearby stalk of corn in frustration, feeling absurdly defeated on what should have been a simple drive. In that moment, every choice she had made came crashing down on her like a wave. The thrill of cutting through the field had vanished entirely, replaced by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability and regret. Karen realized too late that this time would not lead to a quick escape from traffic, but rather serve as a harsh lesson about respect for others' property, and perhaps even a reckoning for her entitled behavior. Karen stood beside her SUV, disbelief morphing into a fiery rage as she surveyed the destruction to her tires. "This is ridiculous," she shouted at no one in particular, her voice echoing through the cornfield. The sight of her vehicle, now a pitiful shell with deflated tires and steam rising from the shredded rubber, only fueled her fury. "Who does this?" she yelled, kicking the side of her SUV in frustration, feeling the sting of pain shoot through her foot. She took a deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure, but it was futile. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and with it came a wave of anger directed at anyone but herself. "This is going to cost me a fortune. Someone has to pay for this," she exclaimed, hands on her hips as she paced back and forth. Her mind raced with thoughts of who could have done such a thing. In her eyes, she was merely trying to make her life easier. The rest didn't matter. The idea that she could be responsible for any damage was utterly out of the question. Without hesitation, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling with indignation as she explained the situation to the operator. "I need the police. Someone has set up spikes in my path, and my tires are completely ruined. I demand someone come out here right now." Her tone was laced with entitlement, as if she believed the police would rush to her aid simply because she claimed injustice had been done. As she waited for the authorities to arrive, anger boiled within her. "This is insane. I can't believe I'm stuck here because of someone's stupidity." She looked around the field, searching for any sign of the farmer or anyone else who might have had a part in this elaborate scheme against her. The mere thought that she could be at fault never crossed her mind. When a police car finally pulled up to the edge of the field, Karen rushed over to greet the officer with exaggerated urgency. "Thank goodness you're here. You won't believe what just happened," she said, pointing dramatically at her SUV. "Someone is responsible for this mess. I want them arrested." The officer listened patiently as Karen recounted her version of events, her words spilling out in an emotional torrent filled with blame and indignation. She painted herself as a victim in every way possible, while conveniently omitting any mention of her trespassing or reckless driving. As she continued her tirade, it became increasingly clear that Karen was more concerned about the price tag on new tires than accepting responsibility for how she had ended up in this predicament. Her refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing only exacerbated the situation and left the officer shaking his head. In that moment, it became evident that Karen's journey toward accountability would be much longer than she anticipated, if she ever embarked on it at all. As reality loomed larger than life around her, so did the consequences of her actions, and they were about to catch up with her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As the police officer approached, the farmer stepped forward, his demeanor calm and composed. He had anticipated this moment, knowing that Karen's reaction to her tire mishap would likely lead to a confrontation with law enforcement. The sun shone down on the field, and as he stood there, he felt a sense of purpose in defending his land. "Good afternoon, officer," he began, nodding respectfully. "I'm the owner of this property, and I believe I can clarify what happened here." His voice was steady, exuding a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with Karen's frantic energy. The officer gestured for him to continue, while Karen crossed her arms defiantly, still seething from her earlier outburst. "As you can see," the farmer said, gesturing toward the deep tire tracks leading through the cornfield, "those marks were made by her vehicle as she drove through my crops yesterday and again today." He took a breath, gathering his thoughts before elaborating. "This is private property, clearly marked with signs that indicate no trespassing. I have put in countless hours of work to cultivate this field, and her actions have resulted in significant damage to my livelihood." Karen scoffed at his words, but the farmer remained unfazed, continuing to address the officer. "I understand that she may not have thought much of it at the time, but those plants are not just things to be disregarded. They represent my hard work and dedication." He paused briefly, allowing his words to sink in. What she failed to realize is that driving through here is not just illegal, it's disrespectful. "I took necessary precautions when I saw her continuing to use this path after our previous confrontation. The spike strips were a way to protect my property without direct confrontation." His tone was measured, devoid of anger or vindictiveness. The officer nodded thoughtfully as he listened. "So you're saying she was aware of the private property status?" "Absolutely," the farmer replied firmly. "I confronted her about it already. She dismissed my concerns outright and continued to take shortcuts through my field without any regard for the consequences." As he spoke, Karen's frustration boiled over again. "This is absurd. I was just trying to save time," she interjected, attempting to steer the narrative back in her favor. The officer turned his attention back to Karen but remained focused on the farmer's explanation. "And you understand that you're liable for damages because you were trespassing?" he asked Karen pointedly. Her expression shifted from defiance to disbelief as she processed what was being said. "But I didn't mean any harm," she protested weakly. The farmer glanced at her with a steady gaze. "Intent doesn't change the fact that your actions have consequences," he stated simply. The officer considered both sides before turning back to Karen. "I'll need to issue a citation for trespassing and property damage," he informed her firmly. As reality set in for Karen, the weight of her choices came crashing down around her. She could no longer avoid accountability for her reckless behavior. The farmer's calm and collected demeanor served as a stark reminder that actions do indeed have repercussions, no matter how much one might want to deny them. As the officer concluded his conversation with the farmer, he turned back to Karen, who was still fuming beside her damaged SUV. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. She could sense that things were not going in her favor, and her earlier confidence had begun to waver. "Ma'am," the officer began, his tone steady but firm, "I need to inform you that your actions have consequences. You were caught trespassing on private property, and as a result, I have no choice but to issue you a citation." He pulled out his notepad, ready to document the details of the incident. Karen's face flushed with disbelief as she stammered, "But this isn't fair. I was just trying to get past traffic. I didn't mean any harm." Her voice rose in protest, but there was a quiver of uncertainty beneath her bravado. The officer raised an eyebrow, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Whether or not you intended harm does not change the fact that you caused significant damage to someone else's property. The law supports the farmer's claim here." He wrote down the details of the incident, the date, the location, and a brief description of what had transpired. "Your fine for trespassing is $200, he announced, looking up from his notes. "In addition to that, you may be liable for damages related to your actions in this field." Karen's jaw dropped as she processed the information. $200? For what? "Just because I took a shortcut," she exclaimed incredulously. "That's ridiculous." The officer remained unfazed by her outburst. "The law is designed to protect property rights," he explained calmly. "You chose to drive through someone else's land without permission. That is illegal." He gestured back toward the farmer, who stood silently observing the exchange with an air of quiet satisfaction. "Not only did you destroy crops that were cultivated through hard work, but you also disregarded clear signs marking this area as private property," he continued. "This citation reflects both your trespassing and the damage done." Realizing that her attempts to argue were falling flat, Karen shifted her strategy. "I want to speak to your supervisor," she demanded, crossing her arms defiantly. The officer looked at her with a mixture of patience and sympathy. "You're welcome to file a complaint if you feel it's necessary, but understand this, your actions led to this situation. Blaming others won't change what happened." As he handed her the ticket, Karen felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. The weight of accountability bore down on her shoulders like never before. She had always been someone who prided herself on getting her way, but now reality had served her a harsh lesson about responsibility and respect for others' property. With each passing moment, it became increasingly clear that she would have to confront not only the repercussions of her actions, but also an uncomfortable truth about herself, one that she had long avoided amidst her entitled worldview. The farmer's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to her unraveling facade, leaving Karen with little choice but to accept the consequences she had brought upon herself. In the days that followed the incident, the farmer took a moment to reflect on everything that had transpired. Karen's reckless disregard for his property had not only damaged his crops, but it also revealed a deeper issue of entitlement and irresponsibility. While he could have let anger guide his actions, he chose instead to channel his feelings into something far more constructive and memorable. One afternoon, after finishing his chores, he gathered some wooden tools from his barn, envisioning a fitting tribute to the chaos Karen had caused. With each cut and nail driven into place, he crafted a large wooden sign that would stand prominently in the field for all to see. As he worked, a smile crept across his face. The idea of turning her misdeeds into a humorous reminder filled him with satisfaction. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the cornfield, the farmer stood back to admire his handiwork. The sign was sturdy and bold, painted in bright letters that read, "Karen's Shortcut to Disaster." He couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of it, envisioning how it would serve as both a warning and a lesson for anyone who dared to take shortcuts through his land in the future. The next morning, Karen drove by on her way to town, still nursing her bruised ego from her encounter with the police. As she caught sight of the sign standing tall amidst the cornfield, her heart sank. The laughter and carefree attitude she had once possessed evaporated instantly as she realized what it meant. It was a stark reminder of her poor choices and an indelible mark on her reputation in the community. She slammed on her brakes and pulled over, staring at the sign in disbelief. "This is unbelievable," she shouted to no one in particular, her anger bubbling to the surface once more. The sign felt like an indictment of her character, a physical manifestation of her entitlement laid bare for everyone to see. Word quickly spread among locals about Karen's infamous shortcut and the farmer's clever retaliation. People began stopping by to take pictures of the sign, laughing and shaking their heads at her antics. They saw it not just as a joke, but as a reminder of the importance of respecting others' property and understanding that actions have consequences. For the farmer, it became more than just a sign. It was a symbol of resilience and respect for hard work. Every time he passed by it while tending to his fields, he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing he had turned an unfortunate situation into an opportunity for good-natured humor. While Karen may have initially seen herself as a victim in this story, she soon became an unwilling subject of community laughter, a testament to how entitlement can lead one down an unexpected path of embarrassment and humility. In its own way, the sign served as a powerful reminder that shortcuts often come with hidden costs, and sometimes those costs are far greater than anyone anticipates. In the weeks that followed the incident, the sign reading "Karen's Shortcut to Disaster" became a local landmark, drawing laughter and curiosity from passers-by. It marked not just a humorous moment in the community, but also a profound lesson about respect, responsibility, and the consequences of entitlement. Karen's actions had set off a chain reaction that affected not only herself but also the farmer and the small town surrounding them. Her decision to drive through the cornfield without regard for property rights had led to significant damage, both to crops and to her own reputation. The embarrassment she faced became a cautionary tale, one that resonated with others who might have been tempted to take similar shortcuts in life. For the farmer, the aftermath of Karen's recklessness brought a sense of vindication. His fields, once trampled and damaged, now served as a reminder of hard work and resilience. He took pride in his land, understanding that it represented more than just crops. It was his livelihood and legacy. The sign not only protected his property, but also sparked conversations about respect for others' hard work. It became a rallying point for community values, reinforcing the idea that everyone has a role to play in maintaining respect for one another. The town buzzed with stories about Karen's misadventures, but they also sparked deeper discussions about entitlement and accountability. Many began to reflect on their own actions, considering how often they might dismiss the impact of their choices on others. It was clear that Karen's experience served as a mirror for those who recognized their own tendencies toward impatience and disregard for boundaries. As for Karen, she found herself at a crossroads. The ticket from the police served as a stark reminder that actions have consequences. The laughter aimed at her misfortune stung deeply. No longer could she hide behind her entitlement or insist she was above accountability. She began to realize that her impatience and sense of superiority had not only cost her financially, but had also alienated her from her community. Through this experience, Karen learned that respect is earned through actions rather than claimed through entitlement. The community rallied around shared values of hard work and consideration for others, a lesson that would resonate long after the sign faded into weathered wood. Ultimately, this story serves as a powerful reminder. Shortcuts may seem tempting at first glance, but they often lead to unexpected consequences. Taking the time to respect others' property and choices can help foster a sense of community built on trust and mutual respect. In an age where impatience often reigns supreme, Karen's missteps remind us all that true progress lies in understanding our responsibilities to one another.